Hello friends, back with another lesson for you, and in this lesson we are talking about a ratio, a concept related or very closely linked to ratios, and this concept is the concept of proportions. So, and as you know, the chapter name is ratio, proportion, variation, and we'll deal with ratio proportion in one part of this chapter, and a sub-chapter we'll create with variations, because that's a completely separate concept and we need to deal with that separately. But proportion is definitely part of the ratio proportion chapter. And when you talk about proportions, the meaning of a proportion in language terms is essentially an equality of two or more ratios. A proportion is an equality of two or more ratios. So if you have an A by B equals a C by D equals an E by F, then what you can write it as A is to B is to C is to D is to E is to F. So this is what a proportion means, the equality of two or more ratios. Normally it's used mostly for two ratios only, but it can be for larger ratios. And please understand the reading of this. This is read as A is to B is to C is to D is to C E is to F. So this double colon here is essentially an indicator that one ratio has got completed, and we are talking about the second ratio. So this is what a proportion is, an equality of ratios. And in a generic proportion situation where you have the equality of two ratios, a generic proportion situation where you have an equality of two ratios, the ratio A is to B is to C is to D essentially means A by B is equal to C by D. And in this way of writing, mathematically this converts to this only, and vice versa. Just like this converts to that, this also converts to that. And once you have A is to B is to C is to D, in this proportion, A and D are referred to as the extreme proportionals, or they are simply referred to as the extremes, and B and C are referred to as the means. And based on this view of that, we know that A into D is equal to B into C, which basically says that the product of extremes in any proportion, the product of extremes is the same as the product of the means. The product of extremes and the product of the means are the same things, right? So this is what you mean by a proportion. And sometimes the mean proportional is also the same. So in that situation, what I mean will be clear to you when I write it down. If the mean proportional is the same, that means A is to B is to B is to C. This is also referred to as a continued proportion. This is also referred to as a continued proportion. In this case, again, if you apply the product of the extremes is equal to product of the means, what you get is B into B is equal to A into C, where you get B square is equal to AC, which also means that B is equal to the square root of A into C. And in this situation, we call B as the geometric mean. We know the concept of the geometric mean. This is the formula of the geometric mean between A and C. So B is referred to as the geometric mean between A and C, right? And essentially in proportional terms, you will say that the mean proportion is the geometric mean of the extremes. The mean proportion in a continued proportion, the mean proportion will always be the geometric mean of the extremes. Now, of course, when you talk about problems, you will not get too many problems based on proportions. Things will be very simple structures you need to understand. For example, if I tell you that I have a ratio, let's say I have a situation where 2:3 is to A is to 33, and then I ask you what is the value of A in this scenario. So you should again be able to use the product of extremes is equal to product of means, and find that the product of extremes being 2 into 33 and the product of means being 3 into A, these two should be equal, and hence the value of A is essentially equal to 66 by 3, which is 22, and this becomes the answer to this question. So these kind of stuff you might face in certain situations, but principally, of course, proportion is just a support aspect of ratios, right? So instead of giving you an A as the unknown, I could have kept the unknown on this side or that side or that side. So if the question changes to 3 is to 5 is to 21 is to x, find the value of x. Again, 3 into x is equal to 21 into 5, 105. Therefore, the value of x is 35. So this is something which is quite normal and natural to do. I will not call this a separate question because just the same structure. The only thing that has happened is that the ratio or the unknown has gone from one point in the proportion to another point, right? So this is the logic of proportions, and as I told you, proportions are not used too often in questions, but it's more or less a support structure to the ratio chapter. So in the next lesson, on the other side of this lesson, we'll start looking at questions based on ratio proportions, and through those questions we'll try to show you situations and shortcuts based on the ratio proportion chapter, what kind of situations you'll face and how you will tackle them. For the time being, go back to all the lessons and make sure that the ratio and proportion chapter theoretically is understood by you, and you have worked on all the thought processes and thought structures I have shown you in the previous lessons and this lesson, and make sure that is working properly before you head to the questions. So with that, I'll wind up. Thanks a lot for listening in. This is Arun Sharma signing up from Coding Ninjas. Bye bye.